out of the waiting room. All right, I think that's it. Well, I want to welcome everybody to another Media Monday, and I'd like to welcome Michael Anastasi, the editor and vice president of the Tennessean. I know many of you are familiar with the publication, the Tennessean out of Nashville, and he was also part of a Pulitzer Prize winning team with the Los Angeles Times. Is that correct? Were you?
Los Angeles News Group.
Okay, all right,
I was
fantastic.
the editor of that.
All right, and again, I thank you ahead of time so much for joining us on this Monday evening with East Tennessee State University. And before I turn it over to Mr. Anastasi, since there's just a handful of us on the call, if we could each introduce ourselves, I think that would be helpful. I'll start. Of course, I'm Don Armstrong. I'm the director of student media at ETSU. And we can just go around. Joshua, you want to go?
Yeah, hello. My name is Joshua Ishala, a student of ETSU.
Hey, I'm Kinsley. I'm also a student at ETSU and a freshman.
I'm Kate. I'm also a student at ETSU and I'm a senior.
Okay. I think that just leaves Heather, who's trying to maintain a low profile.
Yeah, I'm Heather. I am the GA for student media.
All right, well, thank you, Heather. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Anastasi. Now, if you could first talk to us some. I mean, we're always curious and always like to talk about it to all of our media personalities that we have on. Could you kind of talk about life in the times of COVID and how that's been at the Tennessean?
Yeah, obviously it's one of the biggest stories of our times. So, you know, a generation, and this will be a story that influences life and our culture in ways that we can not even yet fully comprehend. And it will do so for all of our lives. I mean, when you guys are very old, right, you'll be talking to youngsters about what happened in the year 2020 because everything changed in that year. As journalists, it's our job to bring perspective, understanding, and the truth to this. So in my role, I actually have a couple of roles. One is, as you noted, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Tennessean in Nashville, but I'm also the regional editor for the USA Today network in Tennessee. So and the South. So in Tennessee, I oversee 8 daily news organizations, as well as a number of weeklies, including the News Sentinel in Knoxville, which would be the one probably you're most familiar with. And then our sites in Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and who did I skip there? Did I say Alabama? And Louisiana. So because of the way we're doing our jobs has already changed in our company, in our newsrooms, we were already very mobile, fully mobile, in fact. So working from home wasn't really a big deal. Like, we didn't have to learn how to adapt to new technology. We didn't have to get new equipment. We didn't have to figure out how to use Zoom. Our companies had been, in fact, we moved on from Zoom, I don't know, a couple of years ago to Microsoft Teams, which is the main tool. And now we use both. So video conferencing, and we're part of a large network, the USA Today network, which is 260 news organizations across the country, as well as USA Today itself. And every day, people like me are having meetings talking about all kinds of different issues. Strategically, you know, our election coverage, for example, we had a meeting about that today. Our company's diversity efforts, I have a meeting about that tomorrow. as well as talking with my local journalists about how we're covering things. So in that respect, we didn't miss a beat in terms of our coverage and how we roll. Every single one of our journalists is a fully functioning mobile journalist. Our photographers, for example, are all equipped with transmitters on their phone, on their cameras, and can send and do send instantaneously from wherever they are, be it covering Hurricanes Laura or Sally, which they've done recently, or sporting events. We do miss the energy of the office and getting together physically. I think the biggest thing, though, that we've had to guard against really is kind of overwork and burnout, in the same way that a lot of you students are having to deal with. I was saying to Don beforehand that I've got two daughters in college. One of them's at UT Knoxville, and she is really struggling with having to stare at her computer screen all day long. There's no difference between being in class, between doing a homework assignment, between taking a test, getting tutoring, whatever it is you're doing, or just whatever, going online to order a pizza. You're just staring at that screen all day long. I think that's been a little bit of an adjustment also for our journalists, but they're getting out in the field. They're out in the field. We very quickly and early on were very aggressive about making sure they had personal protective equipment. Being in the largest news company in the country, we were able to charter a plane to bring in equipment from China. I'm sure we bribed a few people to make that happen, but it did happen. So we've been pretty well equipped. But the biggest thing hasn't just been COVID, right? We've been seeing a social justice movement of the likes that the nation hasn't experienced in 50 or 60 years, and that too is this is a historical moment in our country, in our state, and in our local communities. And so it's not just this one big story that we're covering. We also have this other extremely consequential story happening. And it's like COVID, there's a national narrative, right, to the social justice movement. But when you get down to it, it's what's happening in your community, right? What's happening in your town that matters most. And as local journalists, we are the only ones positioned to tell that story, right? And it's a story that has to be told. It's extraordinarily important, and there's a great deal of responsibility that goes along with it. And if we're not telling that story, nobody is. And you all know how easy misinformation can get out there and spread. And so I think it's just dealing with that. And then, like I said, for us in the South, my journalists, I have about 400 journalists on my team. We've had a couple of really big hurricanes impacting the area. I mean, we just got big news happening all over the place, especially here in Tennessee. And it's just that volume of news. I think that is, without any kind of respite, that is the challenge. Now, one thing I want to note, I'm going to do so by telling a little story, is that a couple of years ago, there was a big scandal in Nashville. The mayor of Nashville was forced to resign. What a lot of people don't remember that also happened on that day, because the mayor news eclipsed that, is that this guy named Mike Fisher, who had been captain of the Nashville Predators for years, announced that he was coming out of retirement. And he was a beloved hockey player who represented the town for a long time. And it was pretty shocking that he would come out of retirement. We broke the story, and we expect to break these kinds of stories. Well, I happened to be at a lunch meeting when that story broke, And I knew it was going to come out at a certain time, and it did. And the person I was behind in line, waiting to get seated, had his phone and got a push alert that Mike Fisher had just come out of retirement. And the other guy said, no way, that's BS. How do you know that? And the first guy said, because the Tennessean is reporting it. And the other guy said, well, if the Tennessean is reporting it, then it must be true. And I mentioned that story because it's at the end of the day, that's all I have. That's all any of us as journalists have, right? When we report something, people must know that it is true. And so our approach to covering COVID, going back to your original question, right, has been that we are going to be the definitive source in Tennessee for information around COVID, that people, no matter what political persuasion they might be, where they come from, can always trust the information that we publish above all. So that's been a very big area of focus for us. And, a couple of weeks ago, the governor invited me to have lunch with him, which I do now and again. Why is he doing that? Is it because, he likes my scintillating conversation at the lunch table? No, it's because he knows I represent that institution that is the guardian of the truth. And he wants to make sure that we have a good relationship as a consequence. That was a long answer.
No, that's a fantastic answer. I want to ask, when you have a lunch with someone as high of the office as a governor, how do you make it clear to the official that, let me see, I'm not quite sure how I'm trying to ask this, that sure you can have lunch, but I don't know, I'm sometimes, could officials try to, influence coverage, you know what I'm trying to say? I mean, how do you make sure that they understand, that it's, but I'm sure if the governor asks you to lunch, you go, so.
Well, so I've been doing this work for a long time, right, at a pretty high level. Mm-hmm. So what you learn, and I don't think anyone's born this way, right? But as you become more accomplished and, hold on a second, I'm getting a call on Microsoft Teams.
Okay, sure.
So I'm hanging up on that person now. Now my other. Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
So where was I? So here, you've heard this before, this kind of thing, right? But the governor is just a guy, right? And if I'll speak freely here because I'm talking to a bunch of journalists, he's full of shit just like anybody else, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of respect for his office and for him, right? As we do with all people that we deal with. But as you become more experienced, you're less awed by those type of people because they're just people. They're oftentimes very accomplished people or whatever, but they're just people. And I think one of the key skills of maturing as a journalist, kind of from going from a student journalist to a professional journalist, is getting past that as quickly as you can. And that's hard because there's a lot of things that go along with that, right? But just realizing that it's just a person that's got a job. Their job happens to be the governor, and you're still the journalist, right? And so what I would say is the governor would never do that because he also has that mutual respect. He's smart, right? It'd be more that type of situation that you're describing I would expect to encounter more with more of a petty level, and I don't mean to disrespect them, but a lower level official. Exactly. And they would lose that very quickly talking with me. But they would, there's a lot of low level officials who think they have some power and they try to hold that power over you, particularly as a young journalist, So your job is not to be intimidated by that, to always be respectful, right? Because the moment that you're not respectful, you give them something to go to your bosses about, right? This person was disrespectful to me. But don't ever be intimidated by them. You have a job to do, and do it. Make sure that you're prepared, right? Don't show up to an interview half-assed. You didn't do your homework. But you're prepared, you know what you're going to do. You're conducting yourself with integrity, and then go do it. And if they don't like that, then that's tough for them. But don't doubt your abilities and your confidence in yourself.
All right, well, thank you for that. And I really have to ask, when you were discussing the Tennesseans' response to COVID, I have to ask, how did it come about, the whole chartering of a plane to bring equipment from
So that
China?
wasn't the Tennessean. That was the parent company.
Okay, that was okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I if I chartered a plane, I might charter a little bitty plane that's flying between Knoxville and Franklin or something. But no, this was our parent company.
Okay.
But it's still an interesting story. So because of the last Olympics that occurred in Beijing not that long ago, we had some senior editors who ran the Olympics had made a lot of because if you're covering the Olympics with a big multi-journalist commitment like the USA Today network does, I mean, we've got 50 people over there, right? There's a lot of infrastructure support that's required. So you're working with a lot of local officials and local business people to make sure that your people are fed, that you've got cars to get around, that you know how to have cash so people can have a petty cash to buy things. There's a lot of little things that go into supporting a big group like that. So you get to know people, and as a consequence, one of our editors say, hey, I remember, I just make up a name, my guy, Fred over there, thought he said his brother-in-law ran a plane company or something like that. Let me call him. And sure enough, he's like, yeah, he got a hold of that guy and said, yeah, he does. It's like, well, how do we get your plane? How do we get some of this stuff that we're going to buy from this other guy who we knew over there? So it's just wheeling and dealing.
That's a fantastic story. And yet, and when you said that, because I spent a lot of my career working at the Johnson City Press in Johnson City, Tennessee, and I thought, wow, if we chartered a plane, that would be the end of the Johnson City Press. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to shift gears just a little bit, and would you mind telling us the story of your involvement of being part of a Pulitzer Prize winning? Sure. And for any of the students on the call who might not know, I mean, that's the pinnacle of journalism. I mean, the awards do not get any bigger than that. And so yeah, I'll throw it back to you.
Sure. So that is the ultimate award in journalism. There is no award that's bigger than that. I'll talk about, I'm going to circle around at the end of my story to talk a little bit about what I was just going to say. But before I came to Nashville, I was in Los Angeles, where I was senior vice president and executive editor of the Los Angeles News Group, which is a consortium of 13 news outlets there. And we had a network. We were part of what was then the second largest news company in the country, called Digital First Media. And in 2014, my team, located in Torrance, California, which is all part of in Los Angeles County, came to me with some pretty good information about what looked like was some significant malfeasance happening in a small school district located in Los Angeles County. So Los Angeles County, I don't know if anyone's been to California. I'm from California. So Los Angeles County is the largest county in America. So just to give that a little perspective, 10 million people live in Los Angeles County. There's about 7 million who live in Tennessee, not quite. So there's more people who live in one county than live in the entire state of Tennessee by about 30%. So there's a lot of, so Los Angeles is the biggest city in Los Angeles County, but there are about 100 other, more than 100 other municipalities, other cities, right, in the county. Some of them are fairly large. You may have heard of before, like Burbank is one. Long Beach is another. But then there's a lot of small cities too. And then there's a lot of small little, mosquito districts and all kinds of various government entities. And because it's so big and so massive, it's really rife for corruption to take place. So in addition to all those little types of government entities I just mentioned, there's also a lot of school districts. So there's the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is massive and is the second largest school district in the nation, second to New York. But then there's a lot of little ones, some that serves individual cities and some that serve areas. And there's this one that is kind of in the shadow of Los Angeles International Airport. How many of you have flown into LAX? I'm asking you, and no one has their camera on. I'm sure some of you have. So right kind of in that area, which is an area that is not super desirable to live because it's the nation's busiest airport and you got a gazillion airplanes landing and taking off every day, right? So it's very loud, noisy, a lot of air pollution, a lot of jet fuel pollution. It's an extremely dense area in terms of population density. And so it is an area that is almost exclusively, the residents are immigrants or recent immigrants to the United States, largely Hispanic, because that's where housing is a lot cheaper, right? Because it's less desirable. And so there's this tiny school district that's called Centinela Valley. There's no valley called Centinela. It's just a random name they somehow came up with. And this district consists of exactly 3 high schools. And so it's not even a joint school. A joint school district is one that has elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. This is just has high schools. And we got some information that led us to believe that the superintendent was basically hijacking a lot of money from this district. So here's the key thing about Centinela Valley. It's also a highly industrialized area. So while the people who live there, largely Hispanic, largely immigrants, largely poor, within the same area, there were all these industries, like, for example, Mattel, the toy maker, their North America factory and headquarters is located in this taxing district. And several other large companies, Boeing of California is located in this taxing district. So in other words, while it's small, this district has access to a lot of bank from big corporations. And rather than, so under the leadership of this, what we proved to be a corrupt superintendent, instead of creating a world-class education opportunity for the sons and daughters of these immigrants, this guy was pocketing a lot of money. So I formed a team. We went about our investigative reporting. I led this team, had a couple of other editors work very closely with me. And over the course of a year, we chronicled this massive corruption, which included the guy paying himself about $800,000 a year, which was more than the superintendent of the Los Angeles School District was made, and he's overseeing the second largest school district in the country. He did all kinds of things to hide money, to pad his paycheck. For example, he crafted his contract. So the standard academic work year is 240 days. So like teachers in your area probably are contracted for a 240-day work year. He wrote a contract in which his work year was 215 days, but he worked the extra days and paid himself overtime. So when your base salary is something like $600,000 and you're getting time and a half, that's a lot of money right there. Plus, he allegedly never took vacation. Plus, he worked every single holiday there was. He worked Christmas Day. He worked the 4th of July. You name it, he worked it. There are about 20 other things that I could name that he did. Anyway, we chronicled all of this stuff and wrote about it. And the work received the 2015 Pulitzer Prize for local reporting. So that was that. And that's a big deal. But what I was going to say at the beginning to tell all you guys is that every year in April, they announce Columbia University is the entity that awards the Pulitzer Prize. Just had the 100th Pulitzer Prizes a couple years ago. It's been happening for a long time. And very cool. You go to Columbia, Ivy League school, one of the oldest universities in America. Fantastic experience. Every year they give away 14 of them. So 14 people are going to get them this year, or 14 organizations. And they're going to get them the year after that and the year after that. They're going to go to somebody. And there's no reason why one of you on this call can't be a recipient of one day. Because someone's going to get them. And I would encourage you to be thinking big and to be thinking that you can be someone who's going to get one day.
Thank you for that. And that's a perfect segue. I'd like to throw it for some questions, or at least a question, perhaps more than one, to Kate Trabalka. She is the executive editor of the East Tennessean, which is the student-run newspaper of ETSU. So, Kate, I'm sure you have some questions.
Yeah, I have a few questions. First of all, I just kind of want to pick your brain on what do you think, or I guess what would be your biggest advice for student journalists?
Yeah. So let's see, I can answer this question for a long time because I have lots of advice. Let me try to break it down. First of all is that you have this unique opportunity right now to not only gain the skills that you need, but to practice them, right? To demonstrate that you have those skills in a real world way. That's what student media does, after all, right? You are going to graduate, whenever you graduate, along with about 6,000 other people across the country who are getting journalism degrees too, right? And everyone's going to be looking for a job. And so simply having a degree is not good enough to get a job, right? Saying, hey, I was in college for 4 years and I lived, I'm still alive. And look, they gave me this piece of paper at the end. What is going to determine whether or not you get a job is going to be the type of what you're demonstrated, and demonstrated is a key word there, your demonstrated experience is. So saying I can do something is great. Them being able to demonstrate that you have done it, and then the hiring editor will be looking at it and assessing the quality of that work, right? is really important. I did a career. I still think about this because it bothered me so much, and it was in like 2013 or so, where I gave a talk at California State University, Long Beach. This is when I was in LA, and afterwards, well, long story short, I thought I was just giving the speech. They told the students that I would also provide portfolio reviews. And there was this like line of 35 students lined up at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I left like at 6. But how many of these students brought me things that were just, there's no way in hell anyone's going to hire you. You haven't, right? You don't have that demonstrated experience. And I can't emphasize that enough. And now that's one component. The other is, what is that experience, right? You need to not only show reporting acumen and expertise, but complete digital fluency and expertise, right? So it's 2020. I used to say, and this is true, as I said this like 5 years ago, or I might have even said that 10 years ago, actually, the term digital journalist is going to be outdated in about 5 years, because in order to be a journalist, you will be a digital expert. Because if you're not, you ain't going to be a journalist. And I think that's largely true. So you have to have the tools. The tools are just the tools, but you have to have mastered the tool, right? Being able to wield a hammer and a saw doesn't make you a master carpenter. But clearly you're not going to be one if you can't wield those tools. So same thing, being able to use the universe of digital tools. In fact, tools is a good metaphor, because every journalist has a toolbox, and you engage in storytelling, and you know which tools you need to take out for that storytelling moment, right? Just like someone comes to fix your refrigerator, they come with a toolbox. They don't use every single one of their tools to fix your refrigerator, most likely, but they assess what the situation calls for and they bring out those specific tools. Same thing, but you need to have a big toolbox and you need to know how to use all those tools expertly. That's a hard skill. The soft skills that go along with that complement that, are how to interview, right? How to write, how to analyze data, how to synthesize information. So I would also encourage you to make sure that you are getting a very broad liberal arts education. I used to say that journalists need to know a little bit about a lot. I actually think that in today's world, you need to know a lot about a lot. How can you, if I didn't have the basics of how the education system worked, right? Or understanding financials, the basics of finances and business, it would have been very difficult for me or my team to have done the work that led to that Pulitzer, right? So all of those subjects that are outside of journalism are really important, because they're providing you with that foundation in the real world of how things work, and being able to ask the right questions. And along with that, I hope you're reading a lot of journalism all the time, right? So if you're reading great journalism every day from a variety of sources, I think that will be one of the best ways for you to be most prepared to enter the real journalism world. So did I answer the question? I might have kind of got lost there a little bit.
No, yeah, that was perfect. If you don't mind, I just have one more. And it might be another sort of long-winded one, but what would you say that your biggest challenges in this career have been, or what are the biggest lessons that you've learned from specific challenges?
That is big. Let me answer Josh's question for just 1 second, because this is a little question. Actually, it's a big question, but yes, how do I see journalism in the near future after COVID? COVID has accelerated some economic pressures impacting our business. But there will be journalism. There will be a need for journalists. And I think there's going to be a need for well-educated, smart, dedicated, hardworking, and very strong journalists for your whole lives. I think there is a particular, I think there's time. I mean, personally right now, like just in my region of the company, I've got like 12 openings and I can't find enough qualified candidates. So, and that's just one little part of the journalism world. So I think there's lots of opportunities still out there. But the underline on that is well-educated, highly qualified journalists, right? People who know what they're doing. So, I'm sorry, I'm turning off my alerts here for a minute. But so, Josh, does that answer your question?
Okay, yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, back to Kate's question or questions. What was? Can you repeat them again?
Yeah. So what have your biggest challenges been throughout your career, and what were the lessons that you've learned from those challenges?
Good question. Because I've had 1,000,001 challenges. What have been the greatest challenges? I don't know. I don't know if I think in those terms. I'm a person who sees challenges and takes them on. I'll keep thinking though about that. What have I learned? I mean, I've learned a lot of things, and I probably ought to write a book at some point about some of the things that I've learned. I don't know if I have. I don't know if I have a good pithy answer for you right now. Let me keep thinking about that.
That's okay.
What I will say is that I got into this business many years ago to make a difference in the world, and I felt really passionately about that. And I feel just as passionately about that today as I did then. And I think our power to do that, our responsibility to do that, really remains unparalleled. Like, there aren't a whole lot of people who have that same type of opportunity. And sometimes it's about putting bad guys in jail. And oh, by the way, I didn't finish the story on the superintendent. He's in jail. Our investigation led to an FBI investigation, and he's in the big house. So, but there are lots of other stories that need to be told that don't require that. But are just as important. You know, right now we've been engaged and we're entering our second year in a project that's really diving deep into the historic inequity and inequality that exists in Nashville's public schools. Project that we're doing here in Nashville. We did a lot of work about 3-4 years ago around the opioids epidemic that's pervasive in Tennessee. And I feel like the day that the state turned the corner on that, which it remains a very big epidemic, by the way, especially in East Tennessee, was a day that we wrote a story as part of this ongoing series of work that put it into perspective that for every man, woman, and child in the state of Tennessee, there were 1.27 opioid prescriptions. And I think that was a day that it kind of like shocked the state legislature into realizing for the first time the magnitude of the crisis that the state was facing. So that was a big story. But we also chronicle, I think we have a really important, and going back to Kate's questions, one of the things that I've learned is, when I was younger, I thought mainly in terms of doing these big, journalism with a capital J kind of stories and putting bad guys in jail and that kind of stuff. And and that for sure remains something important, but also the responsibility that we have to chronicle the great things that are happening in our communities, because there are a lot of great things that are happening. There are a lot of people who are making a difference each and every day, who have stories to tell, and those stories need to be told, and often they're not. And especially when you take a step back and look at historically marginalized communities, yeah, there are issues, right, and things that need to be brought forward, but there are so many people who are doing so many great things, and those people are inspiring, right? They're force magnifiers. Their actions can lift multitudes to doing those great things as well. They just need to be brought to the surface, right? So I think that's been one of the lessons, and that's something that I take a great deal of pride in as well, is that in fact, I have a full-time reporter in Nashville. His job is to write those types of stories, 100%. That's all he does, pretty much. And to make sure that we're not losing sight of the great things that are happening in our communities as well.
I wanted to ask you, could you take us through, now there may not be a typical day, a typical professional day for you, but could you take us through like maybe what one of your typical days would look like? And a second part, what are some of the things that you do like to unwind, for self-care, because, it's such a big deal. And I'm always talking about students that they have to be sure to take care of themselves. And so I'd like to know, what do you do?
Well, I do a lot of things. I hike. I play tennis. I grew up in a rural area of California. A lot of people think California, they think San Francisco or Los Angeles. There's this other place of California where all the food comes from, where there's lots of farmers. And that's the part of California that I grew up in. And so I grew up in a hunting family. So I do a lot of hunting as well, which also helps me fit right in Tennessee a little bit. Yeah, I mean, trying to, one of the things I've been doing recently has been I've been in Tennessee now almost 5 years. So I've been trying to explore the state a little bit. I've always done a lot of travel as well. And I was really fascinated with hollers. So ain't no such thing as a holler in California. And I was trying to get my arms around what is a holler, right? Like, what is it physically? What does it look like? But what is it like culturally? Because I kept hearing about hollers. So this past summer, spent a few days in, was it Johnson County? And whatever county it was the county that happened to be leading Tennessee in COVID at the time too. And nobody was wearing a mask. And I was like, yeah, okay, no news flash here. But it was a rural area. It would be in the middle, kind of east, between middle and east, north, near the border. And just we spent a lot of time driving around and just checking it out. So I appreciate that kind of stuff too. I think that's really important, especially because we work a lot of hours. We also deal with a lot of tragic stories. that over time can be difficult to process, right? So I think that kind of stuff is important. And what was the first part of the question again? What do I do? But there was another part. That was
Yeah,
probably
kind of just what's a typical day look like for
oh,
you?
typical day. So yeah, you are right in that there is not a single typical day. It kind of really depends. I have because of my job, so I have the responsibilities as being the top editor of Nashville. But I have editors below me who run it on a day-to-day basis, right? But I'm really operating on this strategic, realm. But I also have to pay attention to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So there's parts of my job related to that. Then I'm running my region, and so there are a lot of things that I'm focused on region wide, and getting our developing our journalism to be ever better, right? It's all related. How are we going to become better? How are we going to become better? What is this? So that, and being better doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen through serendipity, right? You have a plan or a strategy to become better, and better being in all kinds of different ways, right? All different aspects of our game. So I spend a lot of time working on that. And then as a senior editor of our company, I'm in a lot of meetings with our corporate team or my colleagues who have similar jobs as I do around the country. So like tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, well, I'll tell you what am I doing tomorrow? I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow yet. So my day typically starts, we have our first meeting of the days at 7:15 a.m. And that's key editors of the Tennessean get together, and we have a plan going into tomorrow. That plan is done now. What our paper is going to look like for Wednesday, what our website and our digital platforms are going to look like for the next 24 hours. That's all done now. Okay. We're going to get together at 7:15 and we're going to review that plan again and see if anything has happened since the day has begun, whether there's anything trending, what's going on in the world that might necessitate changes for us. How are our journalists deployed? What are they doing? Are they in the right places? Are they doing the right things? So it could be some big breaking local news has happened, or it could be national news. You had the president's tax returns come out. Is there something for us to do in Tennessee around that? Probably not, because that's kind of a national story, right? Although my colleagues at USA Today are very much engaged in that. But on Saturday, you had the new Supreme Court nominee come forward, right? Well, she went to college, undergraduate at Rhodes College in Memphis. So there is something for us to do. And our Memphis team is, basically putting together who was this person and what did she do? What was she about in her years in Memphis, right? That's something that we are uniquely positioned to do. And it would be very relevant, a part of, as she's about ready to go through this national examination, right, of who she is. That will add to that debate. So we meet briefly in the morning to kind of talk about where we are, what's going on. We come together as a region at 9. And so all of the key decision makers from the 5 states are talking about kind of what's happened, what is happening, what will happen, what are we doing across the South. Just so happens tomorrow, I'm a member of our company's diversity and inclusion committee. It's some work I've done. I've been in that space for a long time. And so we're talking about some of the things that we're going to be doing upcoming. And so that's a pretty consequential effort because we're really reshaping our company in some fundamental ways. I'm excited about that. At 10 o'clock, I have an hour-long meeting with this organization called Leadership Tennessee, which I'm a graduate of, and now I'm on the advisory council. And this is a leadership organization for leaders of all sectors from throughout the state. It's been very helpful for me in terms of getting to know people, establishing relationships. A couple years ago, for example, I was in Maryville, where we have the opening retreat each year for the new class, and I'm kicking back, drinking Jack with the Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court. And he's just bullshitting, right? And those are the types of relationships that you can make in that organization. Then I have I have 3 one-on-ones. So I have typically 1 to 3 one-on-ones every day. These are one-on-one individual meetings. So I have an individual meeting with everybody who reports to me. So that's 12 direct reports they have, not every day, but they're spread out so that I'm meeting with those people regularly. Then I have one-on-one meetings with the next layer of leadership below them. So everyone who reports to those 12 people, I meet with on a more infrequent basis, but regularly, because I feel it's important for me to have a regular dialogue with those folks. Then I also meet with just regular people about once or twice a year as well. So I will have a couple of meetings like that. Those are typically half an hour. We are in the midst of a project called the Confederate Reckoning. We launched that project in August, was it? July or August, but you all recall the national discussion that around Confederate monuments. That was kind of, I mean, this has always been part of a discussion, but it was escalated, right, into a much larger and louder discussion around June. I got my editors together and I said, we are uniquely positioned to bring information to this national debate because we live here in the South. No one else does. And we live among these monuments and this history. And so what can we do that no one's ever done before to bring additional, context to this national discussion? So that led to this project called the Confederate Reckoning, which was 29 stories in which we did several things. One of which was we looked at the 6 most common people who are a statue, because it's not like a million different dudes. It's, for the most part, these 6 guys. And who were these guys? What did they believe? What did they stand for? And we used their own words, and these are mostly very prolific writers and speakers. So that's all in historical record. What did they have to say about racism, about slavery? Rather than secondhand, what did these guys have to say about that? What were their views? So that was part of the project. We also looked at how did these monuments come to be? So there's a misconception through much of the United States about the history of these monuments. There's a belief that they were erected in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, like we are remembering our fallen comrades kind of a thing. And that is true in a very small percentage of monuments, and they largely exist in cemeteries. But for the most part, monuments were put up in 2 periods in our nation's history. One was when Jim Crow laws started becoming codified throughout the South, right? And so here are these regulations that legalized white supremacy, right? Made sure that this is how it works. And these monuments became a symbol of that white supremacy. The second period was in the civil rights era of the 50s and 60s, right? And a lot of people aren't aware of that history, and we wanted to make them aware of that history. Another really, I thought, good component of this project was, sorry I'm going on and on about it, but I'm excited about it, is we wanted to look at our own history. So a lot of the papers that we work for were around in the Civil War, right? What did they do? What did they stand for? Because I think a part of this movement that we're in is transparency. And so we documented that, and by and large, all of the papers were very racist in a word. And what they did, and just diving into that was really fascinating, and tragic in a lot of ways too, but it helped bring additional understanding. The paper in Memphis, for example, it actually, businesses in the Civil War would sponsor like a cannon, right? So let's say you might have the East Tennessee State cannon, and the community would come together and raise all the money to buy it. They were expensive, right? And then people who are students or faculty members would become soldiers to man it, and it would be known as the East Tennessee cannon. And the local media would document it, right? It was like your team, the East Tennessee State Cannon was in this battle and they did this. And anyway, the Commercial Appeal had not just one cannon, but a whole battery, which is 3 cannons. And there were all these riveting accounts in the Commercial Appeal about how many Yankees they were killing. And one of the headlines was a revolute of Yankee blood. And one of the paper's editors had become the colonel commanding the battery. Anyway, this kind of stuff, I think we need to know and understand and acknowledge, right, as a part of this conversation. So tomorrow we're in the midst of phase 2 of this project, and phase 2 is going to focus on education in the South. What are people taught? What have they been taught? That's important to know, because as you look, people who are running things, say in Alabama, why is that important? Because that informs us of their worldview. How do they arrive at the way they see things, right? And if we can get a glimpse into what they were taught, that helps us understand where they're coming from. But moreover, what are we teaching young people today in the South about slavery, about the Civil War, and all of that? I have an editor who works for me who grew up in Alabama. In all of his textbooks, the Civil War was referred to as the War of Northern Aggression. And the Confederate soldiers were noble, farmers defending their homeland from ruthless invaders. Well, if somebody grows up thinking that way, it's probably going to be harder for them to engage in the types of conversations we're trying to have today, right? So we really want to dive in that, and that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Anyway, that was another long answer, but it's a package I'm excited about. I actually think that's something that has a chance at a Pulitzer this year.
I do not doubt it. So, well, let's see. Well, unfortunately, we seem to have come to the end of our time. I simply can't thank you enough for joining our conversation. I mean, it's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing the insights that you have into the business, every single day. So again, we appreciate it just tremendously. And I'll also let you know, once we get through this pandemic, and we will, if your travels bring you to Northeast Tennessee, you're certainly welcome to drop by ETSU anytime, and I'll show you
I appreciate that. One of the places that I did go earlier this summer was exactly there. And my daughter is now in Knoxville, so not too far away. I dropped in the chat.
Yeah,
my
we
email
like
address.
the joke.
What's that?
Oh, okay, thank you very much. And I was
Oh,
gonna
I
say
thought- yeah.
the joke in Johnson City. Uh-oh.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought we locked up there for a second. The joke in Johnson City is that people think Tennessee stops at Knoxville, but you know, but anyway, well,
In fact, yeah, we went to Bristol, we went to Johnson City, we went all through there. So, all right,
great to
you
hear.
guys all have a good evening, and please feel free to email me, and I'd be happy to meet with any one of you individually. Let me just conclude real quick by, I should have mentioned this earlier when you're asking me about what's key for these students to know. Internships are hugely important. They are the number one important thing. And most internships are given out in December or January. So don't be the sad student that calls me like in May saying, do you have an internship? Because I need one. You got to be on the stick right now and figuring out all the places you're going to apply.
All right.
And
Well,
that's
again,
it.
thank you very much for joining us. Thanks everybody for being on here. And
Thank you so much.
And I'll just say, I'll shut up. And many of you I will see virtually later. But thank you again for joining us.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.